So the Panthers have officially benched Bryce Young. Not the move that I would have made, but I can see why they're doing it. Look, he's been terrible. And essentially, what this shows is that they have just completely given up. Bryce Young, last year, I was kind of high on the Panthers. I thought they could win 7 or 8 games. I thought they could be competitive in the division. I thought Bryce Young would improve. I liked his accuracy coming out of college. I liked his athleticism. I never liked his smaller frame, but if Kyler could succeed and Tua could succeed, I thought Bryce Young could also succeed. What do I know, right? What do I know? I was right about the Falcons. It appears that I am very wrong about Bryce Young and the Panthers. Now, I corrected myself early, to be fair. I corrected myself very early. I got off the Bryce Young train about 5 or 6 weeks into the season. But he just looks terrible. He looks like he's gotten worse. They're the only team in the league that hasn't scored a touchdown yet. Or no, they have. They did score one touchdown. They've scored one touchdown. They have scored, I believe, 16 total points, though. They're averaging 8 points a game. And Bryce is throwing more picks than he is touchdowns. He hasn't thrown a touchdown. He ran for a touchdown. But Bryce Young has just been awful. What can you do about it? So if I was Carolina, what I would do, and I understand why they're not doing this. If I was them, I would just eat the season because you're not a good team either way. Nobody thinks this roster's built to win. Adam Thielen at 34 is their best receiver. Jonathan Mingo. Who's their running back? Miles Sanders, Chuba Hubbard. Their skill guys aren't great. Their defense isn't all that good. They just allowed 44 to the Saints and 49 to the Saints, 26 to the Chargers with a not completely healthy Justin Herbert. It's a bad defense. It's a coach that nobody really trusts. Nobody's in on the Panthers, man. Nobody's in on the Panthers. But it is a new head coach, Dave Canales. And I think for Dave Canales' sake, the way he's thinking, because if I was in the front office, what I would be thinking is you let the season play out with Bryce. Maybe he comes alive. If he doesn't, at least we get a good draft pick. We can pick another new quarterback. Maybe Shador, maybe Quinn Ewers, or whoever ends up kind of being that top guy. And we try again. And it's 2 years down the drain, but at least we tried, right? At least we tried. And in a couple, it's not like they're out of it, right? In this division, Kirk's getting old. Derek Carr's getting old. Baker, not getting old, but his teammates are, right? His weapons, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin aren't going to be able to be elite receivers forever. And when they aren't, I suspect Baker might struggle a little bit more. And also, it's Baker. He's always been inconsistent. So, if you think about it from the position of where they are in the division, yeah, this year's a lost year. Last year was a lost year. In 2 years, that division was going to be wide open again because it's going to be Penix. It's going to be probably somebody new on the Saints. It's going to be Baker with aging weapons and a defense that, again, it's an aging defense. And then it can be, a Quinn Ewers or a Shador or a Jalen Milroe, or whoever it ends up being, Carson Beck. It could be any of those guys on the Panthers, and it could be a real competitive division again. In 2 years, that's all it takes. You throw a couple years down the drain, you say, well, at least we tried. You tank with Bryce, and you go out there and get the best quarterback this year's in the 2025 draft. That's what I'd do if I was ownership. Because it's not like they need... look, they're not winning the division with Andy Dalton, right? So they're pivoting to Andy Dalton, and Andy Dalton now, he started 10 years in Cincinnati, then he started a year in Dallas, then a year in Chicago as their backup, and then a year as the starter in New Orleans, and then this is it. Last year he was a backup in Carolina. So he started 12 years and been a backup for 2 years. In his 12 years as a starter, he's made the playoffs 5 times. He has not won a single playoff game, however. He has never won his division. He's been 5 times as a wild card. He did. He won the division once with Cincinnati and made 4 wild cards, I believe. But his last good season was 2017. So it's been about 7 years since he's had a truly good season. I mean, he's a good backup, but nobody thinks Andy Dalton is going to take this team anywhere. It does make for a fun little division with, Dalton's now on his 5th team, Kirk's on his 3rd team, Baker on his 4th team, Derek Carr on his 2nd team. So you got 4 veterans at quarterback, all of whom are on at least their 2nd team. For 3 of them are on their 3rd plus, and they're all kind of trying to, revitalize their career, you could say. So it makes for, a fun little dynamic in the South. But out of those 4 quarterbacks, Dalton is clearly the worst. He's the oldest. He's the least talented. And he's had the worst career out of the bunch. I mean, you could argue maybe he's had a better career than Baker. I don't know if that's true. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. But Kirk's had a better career because he's actually won playoff games. I think he's won 2 of them. Maybe only the 1 actually. But Kirk, I mean, if you're valuing total career metrics, Pro Bowls, Kirk has more playoff wins. Derek Carr also more Pro Bowls, more playoff wins. So Andy Dalton's he's not the answer in Carolina. He's the worst quarterback on the worst team in that division, which again, like I just said, the division is good now. It's not a bad division. It's a good division, right? The NFC South can play football. This is not 2 years ago when they were all under 500 and Brady won the division with 8 wins. This is a real division. It's a real battle. And the Panthers are the worst team with 3 competent teams in their division. So I wouldn't move to Dalton. I think the reasoning behind it is they have pretty much there's two ways to look at it. Number one is they're going to try again with Bryce, but they need to give him some rest. That might be what it is, because sometimes young players need a breather. And it could be that Bryce is just so stressed and he's struggling and they just need to hit the reset button. So maybe that their plan is, look, we're going to sit him for a couple games. We're going to give Andy Dalton, look at their schedule. Let's see who they have on their schedule. I'm curious. Carolina, on the schedule, they have Las Vegas, which is a winnable game. Then the Bengals, which will be tough. The Bears, which is winnable. Falcons, which will be tough. Commanders, winnable. Broncos, winnable. They actually have some winnable games, which is the sad thing. Like the Giants, that's a winnable game. There's a scenario where you should be able to beat the Raiders, beat the Bears, beat Washington, the Broncos, and the Giants. There's a scenario where they can win 5 games here. They could be 5-5. So I think maybe that they're looking at the schedule and saying, with Bryce, we might not win these games. With Andy, we might. With Andy, we could pick up 5 wins and be 5-5 at the bye. After that, they get the Chiefs, which is really tough. And so you don't want to throw Bryce back in there after the Chiefs game, right? How about then the Bucks will be tough, then the Eagles. So then their schedule gets really hard, right? Cardinals look good, Bucks, Falcons. So the end of their schedule is a gauntlet. This is the moment that they can pick up some wins. So I don't know. It's tough because, yeah, if you're trying to hit the reset button, I think what you'd want to do is you'd sit him against good teams, sit him against, some teams with great defenses. And maybe they're thinking, Max Crosby up next, and then the Bengals with Trey Hendrickson. Let's sit him for the next 2 games, and then let's bring him back. Because after the Bengals game, right, they get the Bears. The Bears is a tough defense too, so maybe they're even thinking bring him back to play this 4-game stretch here. Washington, Denver, Saints, Giants. That's theoretically the easiest 4 games in their schedule. So maybe the plan is sit him for 4 games, give him that mental reset, bring him back against a terrible Washington team, at least a terrible Washington defense. Their offense looks pretty good, actually. Their defense will be bad. So bring him back against Washington. Maybe we pick up a couple wins with Dalton and then kind of spark some life into this team. That might be what they're doing. The other thing they might be doing is it might just be Dave Canales looking at this thing and saying, look, I'm a first-year head coach, and I don't want to get fired after 1 year. And you would hope that that's not the case, because most teams, when you have a bad roster, a bad quarterback in a good division, and a first-year head coach, you don't have a, like most teams like that aren't firing their coach if he has a losing record in year one, right? You normally give your first-year head coach a little bit of a leash, right? Especially when the quarterback is bad and when the team is bad, the roster's bad, and the division's good, right? Like if Mike McDonald and the Seahawks come out and win 6 games, but they lose a bunch to the Niners and the Rams and Geno struggles, is that Mike McDonald's fault? I would say no, right? He should have a leash. And the same could be said about Dave Canales, right? The Panthers are terrible. That's not Dave Canales' fault. That's the GM's fault. It's the ownership's fault. It's a long train of a history of them making bad decisions. That is why they're a bad team. If they win 4 or 5 games this year, or let's say, that would be really bad if they win 2 or 3 games this year, I don't think Dave Canales should be fired. That being said, they fired Frank Reich after half a season, right? Half a season. So if I was the GM of the Falcons, again, if I was their front office, I would guarantee Dave Canales, I would say, look, Dave, we want you to play Bryce all season long. We want to see if maybe there's something there. And if there's not, then at least we can get another quarterback next year in the draft. If we suck enough, we can get the number 1 pick, which we might because we really stink. But we want to guarantee to you that we are going to give you another year next year. No matter what happens with Bryce, no matter how many wins you guys get, we understand it's a tough spot. It's a tough situation. And I would guarantee him a second year there. That's what I do. But their ownership's not great. So maybe they haven't done that. Maybe Dave Canales is sitting here really thinking to himself, gee, I might lose my job. I might get fired at week 10 if we don't start winning. So this might be a Dave Canales Hail Mary to win some games. And again, he may be looking at it and saying, look, Andy Dalton can beat the Raiders. Bryce Young can't. Andy Dalton might beat the Saints. Bryce Young can't. Andy Dalton can probably beat the Giants and the Commanders. Bryce Young probably can't. Andy Dalton could win maybe 5 of the next 7 games. Bryce Young maybe wins 2 of the next 7 games. That's the difference, right? That's what he's looking at. And then if they're 5-5 at the bye, which again, I don't think they will, but it's feasible now that they have Dalton, who at least is a grown-up at quarterback. He's not going to be terrible. He's going to be better than Bryce. I do think he's better than Bryce Young. I don't think he's better than any other quarterbacks in the division, but I think he's better than Bryce. If they're 5-5 at the bye, then, then maybe you think about trading for someone, or you think about, I wouldn't throw Bryce back in against the Chiefs, but, unfortunately, the way their schedule's set up is they're not going to be a playoff team. Even if they do win 5 of their next 8 games, that last 7 games is such a gauntlet. There's no way they're making the playoffs. Unless everything falls their way and, they just get, maybe the Chiefs, maybe Mahomes gets hurt, but that's not within, we're not going to think about that. So they're not going to make the playoffs either way. They're not going to be good either way. Either A, it's a reset for Bryce Young, or B, it's a cry of help for Dave Canales. Either way, it proves once again the Panthers are a terrible organization. Terrible.